Hello and welcome. My name is Anna Fleece. I'm the Food, Ag, and Bioprocessing Business Development Officer for the Great Falls Development Alliance. I'm also the Food and Ag Development Center Director for North Central Montana. Thank you for joining us today on our Grants 101 class. And we're going to spend the first part talking about grants in general and kind of how to set yourself up for success with those. And then we'll be diving into the Growth Through Agriculture program, which just opened up today, actually, and that closes at the end of the month on October 30th. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll pop right into it. Grants 101. Okay, so how to set everything up for success. And you're going to bear with me because I have not done PowerPoint since school, and this is going to be fun. Okay, so grants are not a silver bullet. I feel like I was saying, a lot of people come, they're expecting the free money, they're expecting it to be like a blank check or something that's very easy. And it isn't that. It's still a good part as part of your financing stack, but it's not your only option, and it shouldn't be your only option because there are quite a few limitations around grants. So whenever I'm talking to businesses, I always want to make sure that they're connected to all of the financial resources available to them, whether that's low interest loans for specific industries, whether that is a grant, or whether that's maybe a more conventional loan through your bank or local CDFI. And like I was saying, there are some limitations with grants. One of the big issues that I see is that a lot of companies, like a restaurant, for example, will come and they are hoping to find a grant for operating expenses, like to keep their doors open. And that is just not, in my experience, what the purpose of grants are. What I've found is that whether they're federal, state, or private, they're money that's trying to further some specific cause. So for example, in Montana, there's a real desire to see more value-added ag in Montana, because right now we're exporting so many of our commodities across state lines. So how do we do more of that processing inside our state? So there's going to be more of an emphasis on a new flour miller or a commercial bakery than like your local bakery that's only selling in state, for example. So it's important to be in the right industry. I also have the issue with a lot of people coming like, oh shoot, I've got bills due, our cash flow is terrible, I need a grant to keep us afloat. And the issue with that is that grants usually take months and months to apply for, to be accepted, to be reviewed, and then to have the money come out. So this is something to be planning for, months or years in advance, as opposed to I need the money tomorrow. For example, the Growth Through Ag grant that we're going to be talking about, the pre-application is in October, but the grant itself won't be awarded until next March of 2025. So that's quite a bit of time to wait for however much you're asking for. They're also incredibly competitive, like Tammy and I were chatting about. Everyone hears a grant, they think free money. They go through the entire application process, and then your grant is now competing against, tens, hundreds, possibly even thousands on the federal level for who can actually get this pool of money. And grant writers tend to try and be objective. There's usually a scoring criteria that's included with every grant. But it's a competitive business, and you're not guaranteed, even if you put 40 hours of work into a grant. And tying into the limited industries, sometimes they're very specific. So there are certain grants that just target only rural populations, or they're just for a very specific type of project, or they exclude anything like equipment, buying land, buying vehicles, stuff like that. And so your needs may not fit in well with the grant. They're hard to navigate, especially on the federal level. If you're kind of going into it blind, you'll be asked for are you a socially disadvantaged group? Are you following proper procurement procedures? And without having some help or doing a lot of online research trying to decode it, they can be kind of difficult to figure out what's being asked for exactly. And then finally, a lot of grants these days are requiring a 25 to 50% matching funds. So if you were, let's say, for the Growth Through Ag, for example, that's a 50-50 matching. If you were going to request the full $50,000 grant portion, you're going to need to prove that you have $50,000 on hand to match that 1-to-1 ratio. So again, Does it help defraud or defray the costs? 100%. Is it free money? Not really. The other aspect about this is that a lot of grants are reimbursable as opposed to handing you a check for some amount. So you're going to have to put the money up front and then you get paid back that 50%. So now that you've all been frightened off of grants, I don't never want to apply for one again. Here's how we're going to give you some tips of how to set up for success. So first, there's different types of grants, and they're kind of going down in level of difficulty. We have the federal grants, which are for agricultural producers, tend to be from the USDA or the Agricultural Marketing Services. These are the most complicated ones to do because these are grants coming from taxpayer money. So there's a lot of regulations that the money is being used wisely, safely, and invested well. So this one's going to be the hardest one. But it tends sometimes to be the most lucrative in a lot of cases. On the state level, for Montana, we have the Principal Growth Through Agriculture Grant. We also have the Business Acceleration and Marketing Grant that shows up, and we'll talk a little bit about both of those in a second. State grants, because this is still taxpayer money, but it's more local, these tend to be a little bit less rigorous or in some of the procedures and everything, a little bit more flexibility, but also a little bit more limited in scope and funding. Finally, there's private grants through private foundations. And there are hundreds of thousands of foundations that will have money set aside for basically anything under the sun. It can be very difficult to research those. But what we can do is we can do a quick search for your particular industry on the private grants and give you like a list of maybe 200 businesses to look through rather than trying to Google private, private foundation grants for food access, for example. One thing I will say just really quickly is that I'm happy to try and connect people in my area to grants that would be good for them or a good connection. I'm happy to review grants, and I'm happy to try and answer questions or hunt down or find the people and get the questions answered for you so you don't have to. I cannot write the grants for you, but we can do some edits and some suggestions, but you need to be doing the bulk of the grant writing. All right, more general tips is if you pick, the first and most important thing is pick the project that you guys are that you want to work on. Operating costs very rarely are covered in a grant. So just kind of like the cost of day-to-day doing business. But if you have a really clear, I want to start this business, I want to grow this business, I want to enter this new market. And the more definite and clear your plan is, the better success you're going to be finding a grant. And the other side of that is don't chase the grant. So if you see something that's oh, I don't know, for specialty crops, but I don't really grow specialty crops. So maybe if I add some cabbages and try and get money in for my, cabbage or vegetable production, no, stick a good project. You're going to find funding for it eventually. It may not be this year, it may not be next year, but something's going to come up if you keep looking for it. And it's better to stick to your project rather than chasing every single grant that shows up. Another good thing to do is have a very clear sense of your budget. So let's say that you wanted to start your meat processor and you wanted to start selling direct to consumer for people. Figure out how much is it going to cost to have a website, to advertise, to buy boxes, to buy coolers and refrigerators, to get all of your licenses. And the more dedicated you can set your budget, and even better, if you can keep receipts from quotes you receive, even if that's just a screenshot of your Amazon shopping cart when you buy everything, that's going to really help in a grant because they want to get down to the cent level on some of these. The other thing to check on is always see if there's any technical assistance for the grant. So for example, for the Growth Through Ag grant, you have your entire Food and Ag Development Center network. For the Value Added Producer Grant, which is a federal one, there are specific members of rural development who help with writing, answering questions, making sure you've got all the different parts of this grant. Same for the Rural Energy for America. Check to see if there's technical assistance for people you can ask with. You can check your eligibility, and you can make sure you're not really wasting your time. It's always really important to read the guidelines carefully, and there will be guidelines for every grant. You want to check both the eligibility of your project and your business. There's going to, because there's going to be some projects that just aren't, like buying a new wagon, or sorry, not a wagon, a tractor or a vehicle, usually not an eligible expense. There's going to be some grants that are only for municipal governments, or only for for-profit businesses, or only for nonprofits. And so you really want to make sure that you're not applying to something that, and wasting your time on something you're not eligible for. Check the priorities of a grant. Traditionally, on a federal level, these have been underserved communities, so women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned projects. Those will all get extra points, consideration points in the scoring, but every grant's going to have different priorities. And finally, check the timeline. There are some grants which you have a couple months to set up. There are some you have like a few weeks. And so make sure that timeline works well for you with everything else that's going on. The other part of guideline that I didn't write down is check to make sure that if your grant is taxable or not. Because there's a fun fact that sometimes you'll get the grant and then you'll be taxed on the money that you received from the grant, despite it being the grants being taxpayer dollars. All right. So that's my little quick 101 on grants. Any questions? Just kind of on the overview. Cool. All right, we're going to pop over here to the Growth Through Ag. So this is on our montana.gov website. You can just type in Growth Through Agriculture. Just want to kind of introduce you to some of the pages that you're going to be seeing if you apply for this. This is the main page. You can see active projects that are going. This gives you some guidelines on how to apply for funding. Here's a business acceleration and marketing grant, which is for small, that one's only $20,000. It's for more on the marketing side or getting a startup going. Previously awarded projects, so you can kind of see what the council has been looking for before. And then this is all about the council. So the Ag Development Council is a group, and I'm not even going to try and guess how many people are, or remember how many people are on it, but they're the ones who review all the pre-applications and then make the decision on who's going to be asked back for the full application, and then who actually is going to receive the money. So never a bad idea to look on who's there. So here are the guidelines. I'm going to pop over here. This is a pretty decently long document, so it's worth going through this with a fine-tooth comb. We're going to skip through quite a bit of it to kind of just focus on some of the important parts. So the goal of the grant is to strengthen and diversify Montana's agricultural industry. Very open-ended, very kind of accepting, so not every grant's going to be this way. You can be, right now, there's no limitations on like who can apply that I've seen so far. It can be research, you can be a nonprofit, you can be a business, you can be an individual. And here are some of the eligible costs. So then when you're planning your grant application, always check the eligibility and check what an eligible project is. I think they'll have an ineligible just below. There will be a grant for the maximum that you can ask for the grant is $50,000. The maximum for the loan is $100,000. Those can be combined together for a total of $150,000. And the main criteria for funding is your project going to add value to Montana's agricultural products? Are you going to have commercial success? Are you going to create or retain jobs in Montana? That's a really big one for any Montana grants, is the creation or retention of jobs. Are you a processor of agricultural products? And do you have a management structure that's going to allow them to give regular updates? Because the other aspect of grants is after you go through all the work of applying for it, then you have to give them regular updates on what you're actually doing with the money. And this can be something as simple as like twice a year, you just write a letter showing everything that you've done. Sometimes it can be a little bit more involved. So the timeline for this is the pre-applications have opened today, and they close on October 31st. So you have 30 days to complete the pre-application. It's pretty simple. We're going to go through it in just a second. If your pre-application has been accepted to apply for the full application, you'll be notified in November. And those full applications will be due on January 27th. This is a little bit more in depth of a application process. And then the awards themselves will be made late February, early March of 2025. So what the council is really looking forward this year are projects that can include or increase the scalability. So is this going to take you from, selling, I don't know, 100 pounds of flour a year to like 10,000 pounds of flour a year? The really interesting focus this year that I haven't seen on previous ones is that they're looking at an increase of access to local food in rural areas. So this is the first one that I've seen that really rural grocery stores can have some help and assistance on growing and getting their access to local foods. And then business that helps strengthen supply chains and market access, especially in rural areas. And then if you want to get more into the loans, we can talk about that one-on-one. All right. And so some ineligible costs are anything for salary, wages, or entertainment. And that could be like business lunches, taking out clients, things like that. Any food purchases, any institutional overhead or indirect costs, like things for the electricity of your building or internet, usually not. Buildings and vehicles. They're not going to completely rule that out, but it really is a case-by-case basis. And then absolutely no politicking whatsoever. I'm not worried about you guys doing that, but just in case, please never use any grant funding for politics. All right. And then like we talked about, this is a 1-to-1 ratio. So 50% of your total project cost can be, you have to pay, and the other 50% can either be that grant or loan. All right. So this is, again, read through all of this. It's really not too difficult, but it's worth reading through pretty carefully just to make sure you got all the details. And I'm here to answer any questions, double check things with you too, or if there's anything you don't understand. In the interest of time, we're going to pop right over here. This is what the pre-application looks like. The first part's really easy. It's just going to be all your business information that you'll add in. Your priority areas are just depending on, are you, supporting food? Are you scalable, or are you in a rural area? You can include that. Here's the information about your project type. Now, I want you to keep in mind that these 250 characters max, this is not words, these are characters, and spaces count as a character limit. So just when you're coming up with your 250, keep that in mind. Project summary, economic impact. You have a little bit more root space, but you don't need to go into too much detail on this. This is really like high level. They just want to know what you're doing. The other suggestion I have for when you're writing this, don't put in any sales fluff. Don't do any like grandiose language. This is really about how do you just convey what you're going to do as clearly as possible, because you only do have 1,000 limits. Here's the budget information. If you apply and you have any questions about this, please let me know. Go into some detail with this. You don't have to account for like every supplies or every type. Like if you're going to be buying, again, we're going back to that meat processor who wants to do direct sales. You don't need to tell me every single type of box you're buying, but I do want boxes with an approximate cost associated with it, right? Rather than just equipment or shipping materials. Try and break it down a little bit. And here's the really big one with the Growth Through Ag. How is this going to impact local businesses and organizations? The other issue I have run into with clients for this application is they want to invest in something that is just going to benefit their farm or their facility, right? Which can be great. Like, yes, if you want to get, for instance, a lentil dryer or processor that is going to process your lentils, I bet that really would help with your, scalability and growth and everything like that. But then it's putting taxpayer dollars just to help one industry, right? And if you're not planning on like processing all of your neighbors' lentils as well, or wanting to grow and really benefit the entire Montana agriculture in your region, it's not going to be as competitive as somebody who's looking to source from all over like Montana and then sell it out.